In the vast darkness between stars, where civilized species measure conflicts in calculated moves and acceptable losses, there exists a simple truth that the galaxy had forgotten: some species don't fight wars, they fight for survival. And, when survival is on the line, mathematics become irrelevant. The Terran species had been dismissed as primitive newcomers, barely worthy of a seat at the Galactic Council's outer tables. Their crude weapons, emotional decision-making, and stubborn refusal to surrender even hopeless battles had been noted as evolutionary dead ends. But evolution has a way of surprising even the most advanced civilizations. When the HFY swarm descended upon the Kepler defense line, a fortified barrier protecting 12 inhabited systems, the galaxy's finest military minds calculated the odds: 97.3% chance of total collapse within 6 standard rotations. The mathematics were simple. The conclusion inevitable. They were wrong about the mathematics. They were catastrophically wrong about the conclusion. What they hadn't factored into their equations was a single, critical variable: humans don't fight to win. They fight because surrendering never occurs to them. And, sometimes, that makes all the difference between extinction and legend. Admiral Zethkri stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of Kepler Station Prime, watching red indicators spread across the tactical map like a plague. Each blinking light represented a HFY bioship, and there were thousands of them pouring through the outer system barriers. "Status report," the Admiral commanded, her crystalline voice echoing through the chamber. As a member of the Veltar species, her natural composure served her well in crisis situations, but even she could feel the weight of impending doom settling over the room. Commander Yixtal approached with measured steps, his 6 limbs moving in the precise patterns that indicated extreme stress among his people. "The swarm has broken through sectors 7 through 12. Our defensive platforms are holding at 60% efficiency, but the mathematical projections remain unchanged. We have perhaps 4 rotations before they reach the inner colonies." The Admiral's multifaceted eyes shifted across the display, analyzing the data streams flowing past her vision. The Kepler defense line had been considered impregnable for over 3 centuries, a marvel of cooperative engineering between 17 different species. Massive weapons platforms floated in carefully calculated formations, their energy shields creating overlapping fields of protection. Behind them, the combined fleets of the Galactic Defense Coalition maintained formation, their crews representing the finest military traditions of dozens of worlds. It should have been enough. The mathematics said it should have been more than enough. But the HFY were not bound by conventional mathematics. "Sir," Communications Officer Telani called from her station, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated urgent priority among her species. "We're receiving transmission from Fleet Command. They're asking about the human reinforcements." Admiral Zethkri paused. The humans. She had almost forgotten about the request that had been submitted weeks ago, before anyone had expected the swarm to move this quickly. The Terran Republic had offered to send a support fleet, though their contribution had been considered largely symbolic. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, their technology primitive compared to the advanced civilizations that formed the backbone of the coalition. "What's the status of their arrival?" she asked, more out of protocol than genuine interest. Telani's harmonics shifted to confusion. "They report that their fleet is already en route, but the numbers don't match our records. We requested a standard support group of 50 vessels. They're claiming to have sent over 800. The Admiral's attention sharpened. Either there had been a clerical error, or the humans had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the request. 800 ships? That's impossible. The Terran Republic doesn't possess that many vessels capable of interstellar combat." "That's what I thought as well, sir, but they insist the transmission is accurate. They also sent tactical specifications for their vessels, and..." Telani paused, her harmonics shifting to what could only be described as bewilderment. "Sir, these ships don't match any known design principles. They appear to be heavily armed but, with minimal defensive capabilities. The power distribution makes no strategic sense." Before the Admiral could respond, the tactical display erupted with new alerts. The HFY had begun their next phase of attack. Unlike previous conflicts where they had maintained their typical swarm patterns, the bioships were now forming into massive conglomerates, merging their individual forms into city-sized entities that pulsed with dark energy. "Dear creators," whispered Commander Yixtal, his stress patterns becoming more pronounced. "They're forming superorganisms. We've never seen them do this before." The implications hit everyone in the command center simultaneously. The HFY were adapting in real time, creating new tactical formations that their existing defensive strategies couldn't counter. The mathematical models that had guided their preparations were now completely obsolete. "Update the projections," Admiral Zethkri ordered, though she suspected she already knew what the computers would tell them. The holographic display shifted, showing new probability matrices. The chances of successful defense dropped from 37% to less than 8%. The time until breakthrough was reduced to 2 rotations. "Sir," Telani called out again, "the human fleet is requesting immediate permission to join our formation. They say they have a tactical proposal for engaging the superorganisms." Admiral Zethkri almost laughed. A tactical proposal from a species that had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago? Against an enemy that was clearly beyond anything they had prepared for? But, then, she looked at the probability projections again and realized that 8% was still better than 0. Grant them permission to approach, she decided. And patch me through to their commanding officer. The main display flickered and resolved into the image of a human male wearing what appeared to be a simple gray uniform. His features were unremarkable by the standards of most species, but there was something in his eyes that made the admiral pause. It wasn't fear or resignation, both of which would have been perfectly reasonable given the circumstances. Instead, there was a quality she had difficulty identifying. "Admiral Zethkri," the human said, his voice carrying none of the harmonic complexities that marked civilized communication, yet somehow conveying absolute confidence. "I'm Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We understand you're having some trouble with oversized bugs." The casual nature of his reference to the HFY superorganisms was so unexpected that several officers in the command center actually stopped what they were doing to stare at the display. "Admiral Chen," Zethkri replied carefully, "we appreciate your willingness to assist, but I should inform you that the tactical situation has evolved beyond our initial parameters. The enemy has displayed capabilities that we hadn't previously encountered." The human's expression didn't change. If anything, the quality in her eyes seemed to intensify. "Yeah, we've been monitoring your communications. Looks like they're clustering up, trying to concentrate their firepower. Makes sense from their perspective." Indeed, the admiral agreed. "Our current models suggest that conventional engagement strategies will prove insufficient against these formations." "Good thing we didn't bring conventional strategies," Admiral Chen replied. "Permission to demonstrate our tactical proposal?" Admiral Zethkri glanced at her tactical display. The superorganisms were still forming, drawing more bioships into their massive structures. In another rotation, they would be large enough to punch through the defensive line with minimal losses. She had nothing to lose by allowing the humans to try whatever plan they had conceived. "Permission granted, Admiral Chen. What do you need from us?" The human's expression finally changed, and Admiral Zethkri realized what the quality in her eyes had been. It wasn't confidence, it was anticipation. The human was looking forward to what came next. "Just stay out of our way," Admiral Chen said. "And maybe record this for posterity. I have a feeling the folks back home are going to want to see how this turns out." The communication ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Outside the massive viewports, the first elements of the human fleet were becoming visible, emerging from hyperspace in formations that defied every principle of tactical deployment the admiral had ever learned. The ships were smaller than she had expected, barely larger than heavy cruisers, but there were indeed hundreds of them. And, as Telani had reported, their design made no sense. They appeared to be nothing but engines, weapons, and the minimal support systems needed to keep their crews alive. There were no defensive shields, no armor plating, no backup systems that would allow them to survive significant damage. "Sir," Commander Yixtal said quietly, "are they planning to ram the superorganisms?" Admiral Zethkri studied the approaching fleet with growing amazement. The humans had built suicide ships, vessels designed for one-way missions against impossible odds. It was the most illogical, wasteful, strategically unsound decision she had ever witnessed. It was also, she realized with growing excitement, exactly the kind of solution that might actually work against an enemy that had never encountered anything like it. All stations, maintain observation protocols, she ordered. And, prepare to provide support if the opportunity arises. The human fleet continued its approach, moving at speeds that should have torn their lightly built vessels apart. Behind them, more ships continued to emerge from hyperspace, not hundreds, but thousands. The humans hadn't just sent a fleet. They had sent every ship they could build, crew, and launch. Admiral Zethkri found herself holding her breath as the first wave of human ships reached weapons range of the nearest superorganism. The massive HFY formation, easily the size of a small moon, began to rotate its weapon clusters toward the approaching threat. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations to come. The first salvo from the HFY superorganism lit up space like a dying star. Massive bioplasma bolts, each one capable of vaporizing a coalition cruiser, streaked toward the advancing human fleet. Admiral Zethkri watched in fascination as the human ships scattered like startled fish, their formations breaking apart in patterns that seemed completely random. Then, she realized they weren't random at all. "Computer, analyze human fleet movement patterns," she ordered. The tactical AI processed the data for several seconds before responding in its measured tone. Pattern analysis indicates coordinated evasive maneuvers based on real-time probability calculations. Individual vessels are adjusting their trajectories to minimize collective damage while maintaining forward momentum. This level of coordination requires reaction times that exceed known biological limitations. Commander Yixtal looked up from his station, stress patterns now mixed with confusion. "Sir, are you suggesting the humans are operating with enhanced reflexes?" "No," Admiral Zethkri said slowly, watching as another wave of plasma bolts passed harmlessly through spaces that had been occupied by human ships mere microseconds earlier. "I think they're operating on instinct." The first wave of human vessels reached the superorganism's outer defensive perimeter, and what followed defied every tactical manual in the Coalition database. Instead of forming attack formations or attempting to establish firing solutions, the human ships simply accelerated straight into the enemy. But they weren't ramming attacks, as Commander Yixtal had predicted. Each vessel opened fire at point-blank range, unleashing weapons that had clearly been designed for maximum damage output rather than efficiency or sustainability. The energy signatures were crude compared to Coalition technology, but the sheer violence of the assault was breathtaking. "By all the ancestors," breathed Communications Officer Telani, her harmonics shifting to awe. "They're not trying to destroy the superorganism. They're trying to hurt it." The distinction was crucial, and Admiral Zethkri felt a chill of understanding run through her crystalline structure. Coalition tactics focused on precise targeting of critical systems, clean eliminations that minimized collateral damage and resource waste. The humans were doing something entirely different, they were inflicting pain. The HFY superorganism's response was immediate and visceral. Instead of maintaining its calculated formation and continuing toward the defensive line, it began to writhe, its component bioships breaking away from the main structure to chase after the human vessels that had wounded it. "They're making it angry," Admiral Zethkri said, the implications hitting her like a physical blow. "The humans are using the HFY's biology against them." The superorganism continued to break apart as more human ships dove into its structure, each one delivering devastating close-range attacks before being destroyed by the enemy's response. But, for every human ship lost, dozens of HFY bioships were drawn away from the main formation, pursuing individual targets in what could only be described as a rage response. "Sir," Commander Yixtal called out, his stress patterns now mixed with something that might have been admiration. "The second superorganism is beginning to show similar behavior. The human fleet has split into multiple attack groups." Admiral Zethkri shifted her attention to the broader tactical display and felt her understanding of warfare fundamentally altered. The humans weren't fighting a conventional battle at all. They had recognized something that all the Coalition's advanced tactical computers had missed: the HFY weren't just a biological species, they were an emotional one. The swarm tactics that had made them so effective relied on collective coordination and shared intelligence. But that same biological connectivity meant that pain and anger could spread through their formations like wildfire. The humans had turned the HFY's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Admiral Chen to Kepler Prime, came the human's voice over the communications array. The background noise made it clear she was in the middle of combat, but her tone remained conversational. "How are we looking on your end?" Admiral Zethkri took a moment to process the tactical data before responding. "Admiral Chen, your forces have successfully disrupted 3 superorganism formations. Enemy cohesion has dropped by 74%, but I must ask, what are your casualty projections?" There was a pause, and, when the human responded, there was something in her voice that Admiral Zethkri had never heard from any coalition officer. "Admiral, we knew what this was going to cost when we built these ships. Every crew member volunteered, and every one of them knows they're probably not going home." "But that's not really the point, is it?" "I don't understand," Admiral Zethkri admitted. "The point isn't winning," Admiral Chen explained, and, in the background, Admiral Zethkri could hear weapon systems firing and damage reports being called out. "The point is making sure they lose. There's a difference." The communication cut out, and Admiral Zethkri found herself staring at the tactical display with new eyes. The human fleet was being systematically destroyed, but their sacrifice was creating something unprecedented: chaos in the HFY formations. "Sir," Telani called out, "we're receiving targeting data from the human fleet. They're marking weak points in the enemy formations." The Admiral looked at the incoming data streams and felt another wave of understanding. The humans weren't just disrupting the enemy formations, they were gathering intelligence while they died. Every ship that was destroyed transmitted its final sensor readings back to the coalition forces, building a comprehensive picture of HFY vulnerabilities in real time. "Commander Yixtal, begin deploying our forces according to the human targeting data," she ordered. "All stations, prepare for coordinated assault." As the coalition fleet moved into position, Admiral Zethkri watched the final stages of the human attack unfold. The last clusters of Terran vessels were diving into the heart of the largest superorganism, their crude weapons tearing through biological structures that had never been designed to resist such close-range brutality. The superorganism's death throes were spectacular. Bioplasma erupted from ruptured organs as the massive structure began to collapse in on itself. Individual bioships fled in all directions, their coordination completely broken, their collective intelligence shattered by the trauma of watching their superorganism die in agony. "Target the dispersed bioships," Admiral Zethkri commanded. "All weapons, commence firing." The coalition fleet opened up with precision weapons, picking off the scattered HFY vessels with methodical efficiency. Without their collective coordination, the individual bioships were vulnerable, their tactical advantages neutralized by isolation and confusion. Within one rotation, the tide of battle had completely reversed. The HFY swarm that had seemed unstoppable was now in full retreat, their formations broken, their superorganisms destroyed or abandoned. The mathematical certainty of their victory had become the mathematical certainty of their defeat. But the victory came at a cost that made Admiral Zethkri's crystalline structure ache with something she had never experienced before. Of the nearly 3,000 human ships that had joined the battle, fewer than 200 remained intact. The space around Kepler Station Prime was littered with the debris of vessels that had been built for the sole purpose of dying in exactly this way. "Admiral," Commander Yixtal said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from the surviving human ships." Admiral Zethkri straightened, preparing to offer her condolences and formal recognition of their sacrifice. But, when Admiral Chen's image appeared on the display, the human was smiling. "Kepler Prime, this is Admiral Chen. We're showing all primary objectives secured. Enemy forces in full retreat." Not bad for a species that's only been in space for a few decades. "Admiral Chen," Zethkri began, searching for words that could adequately express what she was feeling. "Your losses were significant. I want you to know that the coalition will ensure that the sacrifice of your crews is remembered." The human's expression became serious, but not sad. If anything, the quality in her eyes intensified. "Admiral, with respect, it wasn't a sacrifice. it was an investment. And, judging by the tactical data we've just gathered, it was one hell of a good one. Admiral Zethkri felt confusion replace her grief. I don't understand. The HFY have been a threat to galactic civilization for over 2 centuries, Admiral Chen explained. Every species has tried to fight them using conventional tactics, and every species has failed or barely survived. We just proved that unconventional tactics work. More importantly, we now know exactly how to replicate this success. The implications hit Admiral Zethkri like a fusion blast. The humans hadn't just won a battle, they had discovered a method for defeating the HFY permanently. The data gathered during their suicidal assault would allow the coalition to develop new strategies, new weapons, new hope. Admiral Chen, she said slowly, are you suggesting that this was a deliberate experiment? The human smile returned, and Admiral Zethkri finally understood what the quality in her eyes represented. It wasn't confidence or anticipation, it was the look of a species that had been waiting their entire history for a worthy challenge. Admiral, Chen replied, we're humans. Experimentation is what we do. And, now that we know it works, we're going to teach the rest of the galaxy how to do it properly. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Prime, Admiral Zethkri stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council, watching as representatives from 47 different species studied the tactical displays with expressions that ranged from amazement to horror. The data from the human assault had been analyzed, verified, and cross-referenced by the finest military minds in the galaxy, and the conclusions were inescapable. Everything they had known about warfare was obsolete. The mathematical models are quite clear, announced Counselor Mordain of the ITHEC Collective, his tentacles writhing in the patterns that indicated deep contemplation among his species. The human tactical doctrine produces casualty rates that are unsustainable by any rational metric, yet the strategic effectiveness exceeds all conventional approaches by orders of magnitude. Admiral Zethkri nodded, her crystalline structure reflecting the holographic displays that surrounded the assembly. The key factor appears to be their willingness to accept total tactical loss in exchange for strategic advantage. They don't fight to preserve their forces, they fight to achieve objectives. Barbaric, muttered Representative Kexlan of the Serenity States, her melodic voice carrying harmonics of distaste. No civilized species should be asked to embrace such casual disregard for life. And, yet, interrupted a new voice, it's the only thing that's actually worked against the HFY in over 2 centuries. All eyes turned to Admiral Sarah Chan, who had been invited to address the council as the architect of the Kepler victory. The human looked remarkably unchanged from her appearance during the battle, though Admiral Zethkri noted that she now wore a different uniform, one that bore insignia indicating a significant promotion. Admiral Chen, spoke High Counselor Vexthera, her ancient voice carrying the authority of millennia. The Council recognizes your species' contribution to the defense of galactic civilization. However, we must address the concerning implications of your tactical methods. Admiral Chen stepped forward, and Admiral Zethkri was struck again by that quality in the human's eyes, the one she had finally learned to identify as the look of a predator that had found its purpose. High Counselor, with respect, I think you're looking at this backwards. You're concerned about our methods because you're thinking like prey animals. The HFY are predators, and predators don't respond to the kind of rational, defensive thinking that works against other civilized species. The assembly erupted in harmonic protests and stress indicators as various species reacted to being classified as prey animals. But, Admiral Chen continued speaking, her voice cutting through the chaos with the same casual confidence she had displayed during combat. The HFY have been successful because they operate on biological imperatives that your mathematical models can't account for. Pain, rage, territorial instincts, these aren't weaknesses to be minimized, they're tools to be exploited. But, you can't exploit them if you're not willing to get hurt in the process. High Counselor Vexthera raised a manipulator for silence, and the assembly gradually quieted. Admiral Chen, your point is acknowledged. However, the Council must consider the broader implications of adopting human tactical doctrines. The casualty rates alone would be politically impossible for most member species to accept. Which is why we're not asking you to adopt them, Admiral Chen replied, and Admiral Zethkri detected something new in the human's tone, something that made her crystalline structure resonate with unease. I don't understand, the High Counselor said. Admiral Chen activated her personal display projector, and the assembly found itself looking at tactical specifications that made no sense to any of them. The ships were larger than the vessels used at Kepler Prime, but they followed the same basic design philosophy: maximum weapons output, minimal defensive capability, and crew requirements that were barely above skeleton standards. The Terran Republic has been busy over the past 6 months, Admiral Chen explained. We've analyzed the data from Kepler Prime and redesigned our entire military doctrine around what we learned. These are the next generation of human warships, designed specifically for anti-HFY operations. The specifications scrolled past Admiral Zethkri's vision, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The humans had built ships that were essentially guided missiles with minimal life support, crewed by volunteers who understood that their role was to die as effectively as possible. The beautiful thing about predators, Admiral Chen continued, is that they're usually specialized for hunting specific types of prey. The HFY are adapted to fight species that value individual survival above collective success. They have no idea how to deal with opponents who consider death an acceptable tactical option. Representative Kexlan's harmonic shifted to what Admiral Zethkri recognized as fear. You're talking about institutionalizing suicide tactics. I'm talking about recognizing reality, Admiral Chen replied bluntly. The HFY are an existential threat to galactic civilization. Every conventional response has failed. We've found something that works, and we're willing to do it so that the rest of you don't have to. The implications of that statement rippled through the assembly like a shockwave. Admiral Zethkri realized that the humans weren't proposing to teach their tactics to other species, they were proposing to become the galaxy's specialized anti-HFY force. High Counselor Vexthera's voice carried new undertones when she spoke. Admiral Chen, are you suggesting that the Terran Republic wishes to assume primary responsibility for HFY containment operations? I'm suggesting that we're the only species crazy enough to be good at it, Admiral Chen replied with that predator's smile. And we're okay with that. In fact, we're looking forward to it. Admiral Zethkri found herself speaking before she realized she had decided to. Admiral Chen, the psychological profiles we've compiled on your species suggest that humans actually enjoy combat more than most civilized species. Is this assessment accurate? The human's expression became thoughtful, and, for the first time since Admiral Zethkri had met her, Admiral Chen seemed to be choosing her words carefully. Admiral Zethkri, I think the word enjoy might be too simple. We don't enjoy death or suffering. But we do seem to have a biological drive to test ourselves against impossible challenges. Most species evolved to avoid unnecessary risks. Humans evolved to seek them out. She gestured to the tactical displays still floating around the assembly. For most species, the logical response to the HFY threat is to build better defenses, develop more efficient weapons, and hope that mathematical superiority eventually wins out. For humans, the logical response is to figure out how to hurt them so badly that they stop being a threat. Even if it means accepting massive casualties, asked Counselor Mordain. Especially if it means accepting massive casualties, Admiral Chen replied. Because casualties in a successful attack are just statistics. Casualties in a failed defense are the end of civilization. The assembly fell silent, and Admiral Zethkri realized that they were witnessing a fundamental shift in galactic politics. The human species was volunteering to become something that had never existed before, a civilization specialized for fighting wars that other civilizations couldn't win. High Counselor Vexthera spoke into the silence, her voice carrying the weight of historical significance. Admiral Chen, if the Council were to approve such an arrangement, what would the Terran Republic require in terms of support and resources? Admiral Chen's predator smile returned, and Admiral Zethkri understood that this moment had been planned from the beginning. The Battle of Kepler Prime hadn't just been a tactical victory, it had been a demonstration designed to achieve exactly this outcome. We need industrial support to build ships and weapons on the scale required for systematic HFY elimination. We need intelligence cooperation to track swarm movements across the galaxy. And we need the political authority to engage targets wherever we find them, without having to request permission from local governments. The list of requirements was essentially asking for carte blanche to wage war across the entire galaxy. By any rational measure, it was an outrageous demand that no species should be trusted with. But the alternative was facing the HFY with conventional tactics that had failed for 2 centuries. There would need to be oversight, High Counselor Vexthera said slowly. Accountability measures to ensure that such authority isn't abused. Agreed, Admiral Chen replied immediately. We're proposing to become the galaxy's attack dogs, not its masters. We'll operate under Council oversight and report our activities through appropriate channels. Admiral Zethkri watched as the representatives of 47 species grappled with a decision that would reshape galactic civilization. They were being asked to authorize the transformation of humanity from a minor newcomer species into the galaxy's premier military force, based entirely on their demonstrated willingness to die in ways that no other species could psychologically accept. The vote, when it came, was closer than Admiral Zethkri had expected, but not close enough to be in doubt. 28 species voted in favor, 17 against, with 2 abstentions. The human species had just been given official sanction to wage total war against the HFY threat. After the session ended, Admiral Zethkri found herself walking alongside Admiral Chen through the corridors of the council building. The human seemed remarkably relaxed for someone who had just volunteered her entire species for what amounted to perpetual warfare. Admiral Chen, Zethkri said carefully, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. Do you really believe that your species can eliminate the HFY threat entirely? The swarms have been active in various forms for over 2 millennia. They represent a fundamental aspect of galactic ecology. Admiral Chen stopped walking and turned to face her, and Admiral Zethkri saw something in the human's eyes that she had never seen before, not confidence or anticipation, but genuine affection. Admiral Zethkri, you and your people are asking the wrong question. You want to know if we can win. But winning isn't really the point. Then, what is? Admiral Chen's expression became serious, but not grim. If anything, she seemed more alive than Admiral Zethkri had ever seen her. The point is that we finally found something worth dying for that's bigger than ourselves. The HFY aren't just a threat to galactic civilization, they're the ultimate challenge. They're everything that evolution designed us to fight against, concentrated into one perfect enemy. She gestured toward the great windows that looked out into space, where the lights of 1,000 different species' homeworlds glittered in the darkness. For the first time in human history, we have a war that we can fight without holding back, without worrying about collateral damage or political consequences or whether we're fighting for the right reasons. The HFY are pure evil by any reasonable definition, and stopping them is pure good. Admiral Chen's smile returned, and Admiral Zethkri finally understood what she was seeing. It wasn't the expression of a predator, it was the expression of a species that had found its calling. We don't need to win, Admiral. We just need to make sure they lose. And we're very, very good at making our enemies lose. As Admiral Zethkri watched the human walk away, she realized that the galaxy had just changed in ways that would take centuries to fully understand. The age of defensive warfare was over. The age of human warfare was about to begin. And, somewhere in the darkness between stars, the HFY swarms continued their advance, unaware that they were no longer the apex predators of galactic space. They were about to become prey.